Coming up next on the Witness the World podcast. Laughter is the best medicine.
I made everybody laugh. And if somebody makes me laugh, they're worth having in my circle. And cousins used to joke that Ted Bundy could be in my circle as long as he made me laugh. But he never tried, so who knows? Who would know?
The content here is for informational and entertainment purposes only. Any content here should not be construed as financial, medical, or any other type of professional advice. Good day, everyone. Welcome to episode 22 of the Witness the World podcast. My name is Ben Choi, and today we'll be heading to the United States of America. We're pleased to have on Joan Landino and Jane Buckley, also known as the Therapy Twins. Thank you both for joining us today.
Well, thank you so much for having us. I mean, ditto over here. My goodness, there are certain podcasts that certainly wouldn't want us on. Joking. We're just joking. I used to say for a therapist, people would say, what's it like going to therapy? And this would be when I was the therapist. And I would say, well, it's nothing like coming to me. Off, you know how they say alternative medicine? Yeah, that's it. Alternative therapy is what I've been accused of.
Sounds good. Yeah, we're going to dive right into your different approaches today. That's one of the reasons why I brought you on here. So you two come as a very interesting package deal from my readings about you. Yeah, psych nursing background. You co-authored a book about happiness and mental health, and you run a very unique therapy practice using humor to heal.
Mm-hmm.
So from my experience over the years, the topic of mental health hasn't really been like a laughing matter for most people. And in your case, though, you guys have found a way to weave in the humor with your cutting edge approach to your therapy. So to kick things off, just wondering if you can just tell us a little bit about like the origin stories of your practice, how you got all started, and how it came to be.
I don't know why I'm going to start like this, but I'm the older twin. And I thought I'd put my 2 cents in first because I'll over talk her later. But because Joan is the natural born comedian and we have both suffered our own mental illness, and the book is sharing not only our story, some of our stories, very brief. We try to be a little humorous. And then we try to say what helped us. And I was the very boring, very circumstantial. Like I would go on and on and on and on to the point where even I didn't want to hear myself. I remember I was talking to my ex-husband's girlfriend, now wife. Let me repeat that. I was speaking with my ex-husband's now wife.
Venting, you mean?
And I was venting about a breakup. That hit me so hard. It hit me so hard. But I remember speaking with Carrie, and my first thought was, she is so gracious. Shut up, Jane, just shut up. And then I moved to, she's so gracious. She's not hanging up on me. And she's saying some nice, sweet things, right? But it was when I got off the phone with her that I thought, this is nauseating. And what I hear from Joan, and before Joan, our father, and many other people in our family that chose humor, and I say chose, who knows, they might have been born with it. And I saw their lives moving in a way that I wanted mine to move, which was positive relationships, etc., and what comes with that. And for me, that's the origins, that I was so negative, I had to go the complete opposite and a laughing boost, slap in the face to get me going, I think is where I'm going with that. Okay, so where we really started was in a old, doesn't exist anymore, psychiatric facility from a major university, and it was a brand new idea of having psychiatric patients, inpatient for the average length of stay was 10 months. But I have to say, my very first primary patient, I had her for the entire 3 years that I was there. She was still there when I left. So it was a very long-term facility. But I want to bring up that, we had groups and 45-minute meetings every 3 times a week, and there was tons of care, multidiscipline team. I was a nurse, Jane was a nurse, there were psychologists, social workers, doctors. I'm sure there were other
Music
people.
therapists.
Music, occupational art, and then there were support staff. Anybody was called, not anybody, people who were interested in the profession and going to school for it were called milieu counselors. And most of them they were going for their masters. So there were a lot of educated people, even though back then the nurse was the person who ran the milieu, because nurses were there 24/7. But what I want to bring up is there was a lot of laughter in that building. I mean, a lot, because people thought so many things were funny, and it wasn't disrespectful. It wasn't laughing at a schizophrenic. It was laughing with, if a schizophrenic cracked a joke, it might have been funny. And it was just so bonding. So when I eventually followed Jane, I followed her footsteps and everything. I eventually followed her into being a therapist, and the secretary at the time knocked on the door and said, "There's too much laughter going on here. What is going on?" And don't get me wrong, I learned a lot in school. Jane was my mentor, and people cried first. They often come to therapy, they start crying before they even get everything out that they came for. But eventually, it's called the use of self, you can show people how funny, not while I was going through it. When I was going through certain things, it was not funny for me. But afterwards, you can look back on life when you're older and you say, oh my goodness, that actually had some humor in it. Or there might have been something I learned from it and it's great. And now somebody else might find humor in it. So if you let your guard down, you'd realize that laughter, you cannot feel physical or emotional pain at the same time that you're laughing. So we ought to adopt a little more of it. That was a speech, sorry.
Well, I'm going to add on to it, because I had 3 years of weekly therapy with a very brilliant psychiatrist that also did therapy at the time. And my memories, I can only access 9 out of 10 times that he made me laugh. So then with all the research we did on laughter, the other thing is, if you think about it, what made you laugh, we often remember. We all have a favorite comedian line, or maybe we came up with it ourselves and it made us smile. And just like the worst pain on earth etches a memory in our brains, so does the laughter. What I'm saying, for me as the patient in a community where I learned so much and I respect so much of the care, and I am positive my former therapist gave me so many techniques. Like I said, I remember the laughter. That I think that when we look at mental illness, it is often a black and white thinking, and I'm coming from the depression point of view. You see the world as very black and white, and you focus on the negative. So when the glass is half full and half empty at the same time, I tended to automatically go to the negative. And what I found was laughter could break that cycle faster than like going to school, studying, practicing, etc.
Yeah, right. I hope you have another question.
Oh, I do. You've covered a lot of things I'm going to sprinkle through here for this episode, which is fantastic. So, I guess my main takeaways here is, like, you guys were surrounded in laughter, just in your environment, work environment. I mean, the laughter is, post, a lot of traumatic incidents, different things happening over your life there. But then your therapist. So I guess to be a good therapist, maybe you need to have had good therapy. And it sounds like they, really instilled their humor and all that in you. So kind of, by osmosis, I guess somehow it just kind of came to be. So yeah, very interesting story there. And, you're talking about people, going through therapy, different things. Just wondering, what kind of people do you guys focus with like, is it like PTSD or like people that have gone through like generational traumas, any kind of emotional trauma, or just anything under the sun? Like you guys kind of have at it, and it doesn't matter, and you'll just take it on.
When I was asked that a long time ago, I retired in 2020, but when I was asked that when I first started, my therapist didn't diagnose me yet. Well, yes, we did, because in the United States, in order to get paid, we had to put a diagnosis down.
It might be a working diagnosis, but
Yes.
there is one.
So there always is a diagnosis. But, fortunately, in this book that we call the Bible, when we used it, there were diagnoses that said, there's a stressful life situation. This person is either depressed by it, anxious by it, or both. So that was always a good diagnosis to start with. So after that, I realized a majority was PTSD, a majority was the trauma. And when we thought back on the early 80s, when we worked in that fabulous building that truly helped people, we as nurses had to sit in with the psychiatrist for the initial intake. And I remember questioning later, like, what's up with all these personal questions of trauma? Like that to me felt a tad intrusive, because they even got down to, this is bizarre, I'm mentioning it.
Okay.
It was real in the initial intake, but also in the initial exam, which sometimes was done by the same psychiatrist, was the pattern of your pubic hair. Was it a triangle? Was it not? Was it more of a Brazilian? And this was before waxing was even heard of. I went to school with cops. I recall this. This was hilarious for forensic science. And for the crime scene, you had to get some stuff. And the instructor was like, was it shaved? Was it cut? Was it pulled out? These will all be different under a microscope. And the cops used to say, who would shave? Who would cut that? And how hilarious is that? So anyway, where were we going with this one? It was very intrusive with trauma. So now that these books are out, where there's these men and women who are well, their careers are over and they feel safe enough, like I do, for speaking. But sometimes when you're in the profession, you can't say what you truly believe. But these books that are out are really focusing that it is trauma. So is mental, because there's a quote that says PTSD is not a mental illness. It's a reaction to trauma. So what are we doing? Calling everyone with trauma, you have mental illness? Does the society have it, or do we have it?
Let me just help to clarify one of the
Clarify,
things that
please.
Joan is saying is, when a woman or a person who has a uterus and can carry a baby to full term is 9 months pregnant, 99.9 of us humans walking around notice that. We can't miss it if it's in our face. PTSD, when it started coming into vogue, was strictly a veterans thing, and not just all veterans. It came into vogue with the Vietnam veterans, when apparently in science there was a new way of looking at trauma, life, something.
Shell shock,
Because
whatever they
prior to
call it,
PTSD, they called it shell shock. Prior to shell shock, I think if we go deeper, you can find Freud said something.
Yeah.
But what I'm saying is, so it's now, it was identified with the Vietnam veterans, and that was the 60s and 70s. Then a lot of science and learning happened, and somehow what happened to me was I was diagnosed with depression, dysthymic disorder, anything, reaction, grief reaction, anything that has to do with a sadness, all the way to major depression. When the clinician diagnosed me with PTSD, I argued with her. I did. Just like when a patient said to me, I was in my late 30s, and a patient chuckled and said, Jane, you are so funny. And I literally argued with her and said, I am not funny. Joan, if you met my twin sister, is the funny one. I mean, it was ridiculous. So
that's because we were mirror twins.
So because
so it was odd.
Joan had classic trauma.
Mine was classic.
There was an assault. There was a sexual assault. There were a lot of.
The plane almost went down over the Pacific Ocean or Atlantic Ocean.
Brain surgery at 6 months old. I mean, the list goes on and on and on. Joan had trauma. And in life, they like to compare twins, at least when we were growing up. So the thought of saying anything, even to my therapist as I was going for therapy, the way I phrased everything was coming from a depression point of view. And when somebody mentioned traumatic, I immediately said, no, 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 no. I have never been raped. I have never been beaten, you know, etc. I had never been to war. So the times, and now
they are a changing.
They are a changing now too, because trauma's opening up, and it's like, now everybody's got trauma. Now what do we do? But what Joan was talking about was the basis of the diagnostic manual.
That thing.
In the 50s or so, and correct me if I'm wrong, all the diagnoses, or most of them, had the word reaction with it.
Or response to trauma.
Not you were born with it.
Not a broken brain, not a, you know, chemical problem, or you are a bad seed and blah, la, 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 la.
You know, that.
Anyway, yes.
Wow, thanks for sharing those thoughts there. Not sure which direction we should go with this to unpack all of this, but maybe what we can do is I'll throw a scenario here to get a better understanding of your practice. So let's go with the trauma. We're going to keep moving forward with it. So let's say I booked a session with you guys because I've had to deal with some generational trauma. And the scenario here is, let's say my grandparents, my parents, and they went through divorces. And let's say for myself, maybe I've gone through 3 divorces. So the topic of divorce, very, sensitive topic to a lot of people. And just really curious, like how you guys would, weave your humor into a scenario, dealing with Ben, his patient.
We will get to that.
So what we do is we weave humor in mainly by the use of ourselves. See, now that we're alternative types of helpers, that we get to actually use ourselves. And it's funny, I said earlier, you weren't born with it. I have to say, DNA is very, very powerful.
Very.
And you perked I have to self-correct. I believe I was born with the depression, tissue cells, etc., from the past generations of my ancestors. Then I had the luck, honor, or traumatic type of life that I had to then deal with abandonment, et cetera, et cetera. So then by using myself, and remember, I was sick and tired of talking. I was sick and tired of hearing my own voice. And I was venting to people that I just thought, this is going too far. Can you just stop talking, Jane? And you do what your father did. Do what you're watching your sister do. They were able, and there was a movie, and the movie got the Academy Award for Best Picture, and I never saw it, and I don't know if it's humor.
What is it?
But it's Play.
Oh.
And the father and his young child are in a concentration camp.
Yep.
And the father uses play to help his son cope with this horror that is right in front of them.
Yeah.
So I saw my father used a lot of humor, and it really worked for him, as well as Joan. So then, for example, a sense of self, I would crack myself up laughing by using a story that either I heard from my father, I heard from Joan. Maybe Joan can tell something funny because I'm not always the funny twin.
Well, it can't happen. People ask all the time, how did you guys start doing things together? Well, it was our patients that did that. Jane was across the hall or wherever, and I was over here, and people got bored. They knew I never had a child. They would crack up laughing when they brought their kid in therapy with them. And I guess the way I spoke to them, because I always spoke to children as adults, like I did with my 2 sisters that had kids. Anyway, they knew I didn't have a kid, and they would often say, could you just bring Jane in here? Or they knew I never dieted. Can you bring Jane in here? Or they wanted to actually talk about more sex than I wanted to speak of, or that I had the experience. And they were like, can you bring Jane in? So that's how we ended up doing everything together. And they felt comfortable with family members. So we started doing the entire family because we had different perspectives. We have the same DNA. We have identical DNA, but yet we have different perspectives. And that causes a lot of arguments. And, you'll see that a lot in families. You share DNA, but you all have a different opinion, which is like, how can you?
Can I share a science 101
Sure,
for everybody
Sure.
that says maybe they don't need science, but you need this little piece of science.
Which one?
One is not funny at all. It's twin studies. They have been going on for years and years and years. And twins, identical twins, separated at birth. And there were ones in one country or state and the other ones somewhere else. And they happen to pick the same profession, pick a similar
Vehicle.
Spouse. They pick similar hobbies. And science can't figure any of this out.
I know it.
Because the answer to all the questions is it is nature and nurture. It is not one specifically or the other. It's both. Science wants so hard to prove it's nature and it's all DNA. When if it's the egg split, fertilized egg split, you have identical twins. We were both in incubators for 30 days, but at 6 months old, Joan had to go in for major surgery. She was sick during this first 6 months of our lives. And as a parent of a child, I am fully aware of what the sickly child syndrome is and the guilt that society puts on you all the way to what you do to yourself. And that Joan got all this extra attention. And, thank you, mommy and daddy, I could say, for all the therapy, but the grown-up Jane knows perfectly well that they had no choice. She was having seizures. So anyway, all that nurture and lack of nurture, even if some of the nurture was poking and prodding, and I can't help but be so in awe that I ended up with a lot of isolated abandonment type traumas, and Joan, through the years, ended up with more poking and prodding.
Oh, did she clarify? I was, because I had the seizure disorder and the brain tumor, they were constantly interventions, medical interventions. So even negative attention is attention still. Jane was wheeled off because she was not sick. And the doctor,
after 2 weeks, I should have been sent home, and the doctor was
but the doctor at that time said, and insurance would never do this today, can she stay in the hospital for 2 more weeks with Joan or whatever? So then the parents could have them not sick. It was overwhelming for our mother
and come home
together. So that in itself, as a nurse, we know if you have a well patient on the floor, they're not getting any attention. So when we did our practice and we had the privilege of seeing hundreds of individuals that had been incarcerated, quite a few of them, half of their lives, the United States has to step up their game here because we almost encourage people to be in prison and then we treat them. If they're not sociopathic, we'll make sure they are before they leave. Anyway, we were able to do that. And what I realized at the time was I was sharing symptoms of trauma with men, much more men than a woman. And they were in prison for over 3 years. Under 3 years, and solitary confinement was that one. All of a sudden, because it was annoying in my office, I'm like, you remind me of Jane. And it was the person who had been in solitary confinement. And I'm thinking, duh, poor Jane. She just,
or adopted,
or that kind of trauma.
That.
So yes,
my ex-husband was adopted. I find that interesting. I even picked a person similar to my abandonment stuff.
So unfortunately or fortunately, with trauma, you first have to be validated because a lot of people will say, no, you didn't go through that. There's a movie out, it's fantastic, that the system pretty much makes this young female believe that she made up the rape in her head. She was like, probably. And it was female cops later. I hate to be like, the guy didn't see it, but it was 2 female cops and it was based on a true story. That I could be lying about that. I don't know if it was based on a true story. They caught it. But anyway, it's weird. It's a manipulation of the mind. And as we all know, you manipulate the mind. And the point of therapy is, whether it's my own or giving it, you want to recognize habitual patterns. And if those are negative patterns in your life or unsafe or ineffective, irrational.
like me.
You know, you want to just help that person, you know, reframe it or move in a different direction. So when you say the pattern of the generational trauma, that's harder. It's because the first person had the chance, but nobody helped them, I guess, to get out of that trauma. But here's the clincher. When I was in school, I had the privilege of a female going back for her doctorate, and she presented her dissertation to us in class. And what I had heard, Vietnam veterans, because it was a big deal. They were the ones first getting the post-traumatic stress disorder diagnosis. And what she had learned was if you had early childhood trauma coupled with adult trauma, there was a symptom that was not even in the Bible, the DSM, where we were diagnosing people. And I heard her and I started to cry, excused myself out of the room, because it was hearing your name being called and nobody was there. Routinely growing up through adulthood, I would be like this. Yeah, nobody called my name. No one, I would never, you know, I didn't really say anything because nobody caught my attention deficit disorder or processing disorder either, or tic disorder. That went through my first master's. Then I guess the treatment was a bit better. But yeah, so that blew me away. So when we had the privilege of treating PTSD, we added that symptom, asked it in the initial assessment, because people often don't know or are unwilling to tell you childhood trauma, because that's usually something people feel ashamed about for some reason.
Or they deny it. In fact, they
might ignorant that
or deny it themselves. I remember because Joan had suffered. I grew up in a household where Joan was sick. The rest of us were well,
or appeared it.
Well, listen, it is so much fun for an hour to a week to a year to attack one or both of your parents about how they did you wrong. It's a lot of fun. But when you do it for 10 years,
and that would be in the practice as well.
When you do it for 10 years, like I did, what I found, because every human being has a natural contradiction. You know how they say doctors and nurses are the worst patients, but they can be great for you. You know, you can have a buddy that gives the best advice, but he has the worst relationships on earth because, you know, that. So every human being has that going on, where it's just an obvious contradiction to everybody else, but not to themselves. Yeah. Like I had PTSD, but because I was told I didn't have anything wrong with me, or then I was told I suffered from depression, it was very hard for me. You know, I was told I was the fat twin. And we grew up in the 70s, and I don't know if you've seen pictures of everybody in the 70s. Take a look at everyone at Woodstock. Now, they are a little older than us, those kids, but we were skinny. And I'm called fat. And thank God, eating disorders were not in vogue yet. It was the later 70s, early 80s when they were more in vogue. And because I would have had one, and you know, somebody might say I already have one because I used to be the dieter, and that's why Joan's clients wanted to hear from me. What did I do?
But anyway, yeah, I hope we answered. It was a lot of divorce, infidelity, a lot of bringing up, why am I such a bully at home in a relationship? What's wrong with me? I'm degrading. Is it emasculinate, whatever that is? Just a lot of trauma, a lot. But most of which we heard, I mean, still in that old building that I'm talking about back in the 80s, I have yet to hear, I think, Jane had somebody. I was going to say, I've yet to hear something as traumatic as I heard from the individuals that ended up in that building, that they stayed for so many years to get better. Unfortunately, the medicines back then, some of them had toxic side effects. It was really too bad. And then I saw some of them later, and it was like, wow, this is really too bad. Like, what a sad life, you know? And so what I believe, and the book that I promote, The Body Keeps the Score with Trauma,
by Dr. Bessel.
You may think you're dealing with your issues in therapy. You may think that you're dealing with it in life because you seem so well adjusted. But like he said, that body remembers, your body. And, you know, the tics I was having in get in college. I started stuttering in my 40s. These are obvious signs you're not getting the treatment you deserve. I was hearing my name.
But you were getting.
Oh yeah, I was getting treatment though until like when I was 35. So that was, what year was that? 19.
But the point is
I don't know.
You got a little bit
94.
better.
Yeah, you do. You get better, a little better. I think therapy is wonderful, especially if you can laugh, because one psychiatrist that I was going for therapy with, we laughed so hard. He actually said, Joan, this is really interfering with your treatment. And I'm like, I don't think so, because what I always strove for, if I don't think that's a word, strived for, who knows if that's a word, was to find somebody in life that made me laugh. I made everybody laugh. And if somebody makes me laugh, they're worth having in my circle. And cousins used to joke that Ted Bundy could be in my circle as long as he made me laugh, but he never tried. So who knows? Who would know?
There's some interesting thoughts there, and yeah, thanks for giving us that deep dive there. Very hilarious points there, and one big takeaway is like what separates you two from I think everybody else is like you're willing to go where no other therapist has gone before, which is a deep dive into, I guess, the dark recesses of your minds, and no problem sharing, which gives you instant credibility with your patients. So because they say, okay, well, hey, I've been through stuff, you've been through stuff, let's open up a little more, and then you kind of organically take things from there. Is that, I guess that's kind of what you've seen over years, I suppose.
People would say, oh, I'm going to tell you the truth. You don't have to. I would say I'm still going to get paid. It's up to you if you want to. I often didn't recall, there were too many people, too many traumas. So people would often say, well, you remember what happened with, whatever. And I'd be like, no, I actually don't remember. Because yes, there's a few people that I saw for, over 6 months and over years, you do end up getting them correct. But if you're just seeing people on a quick basis. So I do want to say having therapy, I think you mentioned it, I believe made me a better therapist. And having supervision, collaboration, you always have to check and recheck because you might, have some issues of your own going on there where you might be mean to somebody, which you never are, or you might be overly nice. Now all of a sudden they're coming over for Christmas.
Yeah. So I might tell the story that as a patient, the one that I went for 3 years every Wednesday at noon, that one time, maybe twice, but there was this one time where he double booked, but you see, that's how I am choosing to remember it. There were 2 chicks in the waiting room, and one of them was me.
Uh-oh.
And I'm sure that this is my appointment because every Wednesday at noon is my appointment. And he had to take me aside and to say, Jane, don't you remember we spoke of this last week that I couldn't see you Wednesday at noon? But because I forgot that until that moment, now he reminded me. And of course I remembered, but I had a younger child and I'm busy running around. Oh, it's Wednesday at noon. I got to be over there. I can share with people, not right now, how mad I was at him, how I looked at him afterwards, for how long it took me. I knew that was called transference. And I was like, by golly, I'm going to figure this out. And then it was what a journey and what a trip. And there are some more funny things too personal right this second, so we can move on.
But bringing yourself into it oftentimes will get the conversation going, because it's pretty hard to start telling your deepest, darkest shit to a stranger.
That's a very good point. And I think that's kind of, from my experience, if you can get to a point on your healing approach, if you're, in my mind, I have this 80% rule because I don't think anything's ever 100%. So if you're 80% healed, you're in a good place. And once you get to that point, if you're the kind of person that's been through different traumas in life, I've been through, you guys have been through, and I'm sure others, if you can talk about it, joke about it, I think that's an indicator for me that you have healed through that trauma and you're on the other side of it and you're in a good place. Is that kind of your observations over the years as well?
Absolutely. One of the things that most therapists, or if you have best friends, can hear is a common theme that most people complain about their primary caregiver, whether that's a mommy, a daddy, two daddies, an aunt, a grandmother, whoever was that caregiver.
A German Shepherd.
It could be the lady or the guy at the orphanage, you know, whatever. It could be a gosh darn duck, right?
Yeah.
But we all have issues with those primary caregivers. And if people can vent and not be told to shut up and you shouldn't talk like that, that's how it tends to get started, is when we are silenced too quickly, that then we carry little kids, little problems, they say, big kids, big problems.
That's a good one.
And I'm a parent, and I got to tell you, enjoy when they're 1, 2, and 3, because there's an age 4 that comes up and that doesn't have a good nickname.
I think I said it before, unfortunately or fortunately, when you have trauma, a human being, this is so, it's a bummer for me. We actually have to be validated. So if you're wondering whether or not to validate a child for whatever trauma they had, and you really don't want them to be the screaming mess. I guess when they fall, you're supposed to pretend that didn't really happen and move on. I gotta say, unfortunately.
No, that didn't hurt that much.
Yeah, unfortunately, you have to actually name it, what happened. Oh, you fell. You must have hurt yourself. Let me put a Band-Aid on and then let's move forward, because apparently the
Human psyche.
humans, beings, and in therapy for a really, really, really long time, they were constantly looking for, is it approval? Oh, that word, disappointment. Try not to say that as an adult to a kid. Do you realize you can hit a kid and they can get over it? But when you say that word, I couldn't get over it. In therapy, I kept hearing this word disappointed. I disappointed who cares? I couldn't believe it. I was like disappointed. I didn't really catch on. So I guess words hurt more sometimes than objects do.
So there's a history too. Sticks and stones will break my bones.
Yeah.
But words will never hurt me.
Yeah.
That
The whole world
was a man of a religion. I want to call him Christian somewhere, but don't quote me. But there was this religious person in a community that changed on purpose the original poem that actually, I don't even know the author of the poem, but sticks and stones can break my bones, but words, it's the answer to the rest of that sentence is they hurt me more. Right.
But
so,
it starts out that they may never hurt me, but at the end of it,
no, so
a
religious person changed it on purpose for, I just read it. It was like an anthropological article, and they changed it on purpose for like crowd control. They didn't want a lot of verbal bullies. You know, maybe it was during alcohol prohibition days where you had a lot of people overly drinking and screaming profanities, but it was like, they were trying to convince people that words don't hurt when they really do. So then I grow up with ADD, and my ancestors all have ADD. I believe the short and abridged version to be true. And now I don't understand why the words are hurting me.
But if we went back to the original poem, I guess it does say that. Because I was accused of that. My ex-husband and Jane said they would rather be hit by a baseball bat than to hear my words. And I found that ridiculous at the time. But when I hear the disappointment, I was like, oh my words must have been harsh. I was downplaying how I spoke to people.
No, those are some interesting stories there, and interesting insights about like the words. Maybe stronger weapon than a physical weapon. I guess it depends on everybody's background and how they perceive it, and also how their thinking patterns is. And that's kind of the next thing I want to kind of get at, like, because everybody has different thinking patterns, and I think one thing that a lot of people, and this was true for myself for many years until I got around this, it's like you don't think about what you're actually thinking about and how you're thinking and why you think the way you do. And
Right.
There's a very funny cognitive behavioral therapist and comedian, Loretta LaRoche. I don't know if you two have heard of her before.
I have heard of her only.
Okay, all right. So I'll put a link to her TED Talk later on this podcast. But she just is a hilarious speaker, and she really dives into this topic about like nobody ever thinks about what they're thinking about. And if you actually took a deep dive, and dissected how you're thinking, what you're thinking about, how many thoughts you're thinking about. I used to be the guy that had 5,000 thoughts go in my head all at once. And then later on, yeah, I've been able to wean that down for a handful of thoughts, at any given time or nothing. So, but it does take time. You have to put in the work and to, pick apart these things. And yeah, just wondering, what is your thought about, people and their thoughts?
Well, I'm going to just use myself again, because depression is really, they say anger turned inward. And I used to try to pretend that for me, it wasn't so much anger, it was really hurt. It was anger. It really was. Because cognitive behavioral therapy gets so boring that I hope Loretta can make it funny. Because if I don't make it funny, I'm not going to do it. And I'm speaking for myself. So I used to say, let's just go with, I was the fat twin. I used to call my mother and say, but Mom, I don't think I look that fat. And she's like, Jane, you're not fat. So I would just say, I fill out my jeans better than Joan. And I know that sounds like a horrible thing to say because it's better than Joan, but it was the only thing I could muster at that time. And to explore how many times you have these self-deprecating negative thoughts is you've got to pay attention. And most humans don't have that good of an attention span to then pay attention. And that's where I believe humor comes in.
Yeah, and we did this in our practice too. We said, take note of the negativity. And everybody said, well, I don't know how to. And I said, well, Jane and I do that when we spend most of the day together. If I said something like, you're an idiot, like I'm talking about myself, you are an idiot. I said it 3 times apparently. Jane would say, excuse me, what did you mean to say? And I thought, oh God, I did it again. It is amazing. See, now that could cause a fight though. If you're not already both agreeing, that could have caused a huge fight, especially, people are partners or together.
Because that's my sense of humor more than Joan's.
Yeah.
It's not good to use my dry humor.
But we started doing that when we were still working, and it ended up being fantastic. People came up with, or maybe we did, if I said, oh, I'm such an idiot, if I caught myself, I would say, excuse me, or cancel universe. What I meant to say was, I'm an intelligent being, or I'm adequate for all situations. So then patients started doing it, and it was pretty funny. Well, I thought it was really funny, actually. I would hear people going towards the bathroom, and I would hear them saying things like, I'm a well-adjusted person, I respond, I don't simply react. And we had 2 therapy cats there at the same time, orange cats, and they were clawing at patients from up in their little things. It was really fun.
And remember how
wonderful.
laughter helps us
Yeah.
to remember a particular thing, even if it was one laugh and it was one comment, and then the rest you have to work on again. But imagine you didn't get that with laughter and you had to study it and practice it and all that. That's like going back to school. And, most of us graduated and we don't want to. I know I sound like a child. We don't want to do that work. But if you can make the work fun, these are the teachers we all remember from our days. Everyone remembers the teacher that made something a little lighter in our lives.
And a lot of people don't like it. They believe cognitive behavioral therapy should have homework and that kind of thing. You go wild if that's the type you want. But the 4 words that we had used, ineffective versus effective, rational versus irrational, positive versus negative,
Safe versus unsafe.
That's just everywhere in psychiatry on people trying to cognitively change your perception of something. But if somebody else wants to, because we didn't take a lot. We have an older sister who just did everything better, seemed happier, seemed much more well-adjusted, and gave us the insight of Louise Hay, a person who was not, see, maybe that's the problem. She wasn't super educated. I think she was a model and then worked for a church. And what she was able to put together was, instead of me saying I'm an idiot, I might say I'm very smart. Those were easier to do and get better faster than coming to my office and listening to somebody who invited their mother-in-law to live with them and listening every week to why this was such a bad idea and how much hate he had towards the mother-in-law that he invited, never moving forward with, you know, she's 80 something and is going to die pretty soon. Maybe that's elder abuse, which it didn't get that far, obviously, but you know, change your perception. You know, she might be a bitch, but you know what? There's something inside that old woman. She could have been on the airplanes during World War II where, you know, women went to all the factories and they were making all of the airplane stuff, and they were on airplanes and learning how to fly because everyone got together to help. It was a world war again. So, you know, people had to come together. Like at 9/11, I really just heard somebody in a restaurant saying it. Wasn't it nice after 9/11? So my ear perked up. And I felt it too. It was more of a community. You didn't need therapy every week. You had people around you. And unfortunately, with 8 billion people, I guess we separated more than coming together.
Yeah, that's.
And I'm sure we didn't answer your question.
No, I think you covered something here that I want to kind of just touch on. So, because like just doing the preventative work, you're talking about like doing the work, and it sounds like laughter is the best medicine. And if you can kind of delve into that as opposed to all the, you know, the technical book work and other homework there, you were touching on like if it speaks to certain people, great. If not, but by default, laughter is the best medicine. And given, you know, the world we live in now with, you know, the electronics and social media, like there's a lot of, you know, vitriol and polarizing views and stuff, but is maybe one of the things to help, you know, the healing process to maintain our mental health and improve it. Yeah, just to find funny things that, you know, just speak to us and make a point. Maybe it's like every week you get to spend several hours doing funny things, laughing at things, watching things. Yeah, just wondering what your thoughts are on the preventative side, maintaining mental health, and just watching certain things. I don't know. Just wonder what your thoughts are.
You know, and I have a lot of thoughts because I had to. I didn't have to, I guess, but I felt like I needed years, 3 to be exact, of venting my sadness. So when Joan said, if that works for you, then do it. Sometimes you do it until, like me, I'm talking to Carrie and now I can't stand hearing myself. Everyone needs to get things off their chest. But what we were noticing was the people that chose humor to use as their memory issues, as they were learning their memories, they not only got to remember everything, all the traumas, but they were laughing, and that was so good for their body. Unlike me, one of the things I found out after 3 years of negativity, and I couldn't help it. So I'm not saying if you need 10 years, you need 10 years, but that shouldn't be your end goal, because my body, all the antidepressants worked pretty well above the neck. They did mostly. Then you get on a new one and you get, even as one grandfather would say, more better. You're like, oh, wow, this is what a good mood is, that, you know, you're nowhere near mania, but you're like better than you were on the other one. And that's what's dangerous for people who have never suffered from depression, whether they're a therapist, the president of the United States, or an alligator in the swamp. If you don't know, and these questionnaires, I've done all of them. If you don't know what it's like to have a symptom of, I don't have any interest or pleasure in anything, and to have the wherewithal to finish that sentence as you hear a patient speak, because what that turns into is this thing called motivation. And what I used to say to all my clients that couldn't motivate at all, and I guess I would validate them. I did not have to use the sense of self, but occasionally I would say to someone who was on a medicine that they said it worked for everything, but I still don't have that motivation to actually get out of my bed. And I would look up and say, well, when I find the medicine that does that, I'll be on it and I will offer it to you.
Right.
So I think that what there's nothing like having had that experience. And in psychiatry, we all know that AA is one of the best support groups out there. It's probably the only, and there's strands from that, you know, branches, NA and ACOA and all of that. Joan, you wanted to say something?
Well, I'm going to say for me with the laughter, it doesn't come all the time. I mean, the laughter is a part of it. But, you know, when I went through trauma, what I found myself doing was watching every movie that made me cry to the point where my life was way better than, you know, whew, I'm not that bad. But I watched a lot of traumatic movies in a lot of different languages to make sure I saw all the trauma. I really wanted a lot. This way here, I finally found a quote that finally helped me. And people joke 9 times you have to be encouraged to go to therapy before you go. 9 times you have to hear to leave the abusive partner before you even consider leaving. There's something about that. So I wanted to make sure I watched many, many sad movies. And what I heard finally was a woman telling her nephew or whoever it was who wanted to kill himself, trauma can be a gift. And he was like, are you kidding me? He couldn't believe it. He was bawling his eyes out. He wanted to die. And she said, you can now recognize the hurt in another person. So I used to joke with people. My joke at the end of it was like, now go help somebody, because what we forget is helping another human being is the #1 way to get out of a depression. And no one even has the energy to do that. But what I'll say
Only
now
when
is,
you've been arrested and you don't want to go to jail and they offer, you got an attorney and they say community service, you're like, oh my goodness, am I motivated for that? Yes, we are sometimes.
yes. But then after that, what I would say to people is try a comedian. Comedians, there's quotes about comedians all over the place. It's kind of a sad quote. It was something like, I live in a sad world where it's the comedians I watch that are bringing up the global issues instead of the politicians that are here to govern me. But anyway, so when you do watch comedians, there's all kinds of stuff in psychiatry that we have to touch upon, but they're bringing it up, and it's so easy the way they do it. I would implore people to find who your favorite comedians are and watch them, including the one that comes out with stuff that, you know, people are appalled at. Anthony Jeselnik, and he said, you know, you bought the ticket, you knew, and he is so deep and negative. He brings up incest. I mean, it's a lot of information. French movies have a way of bringing it up in a way you would learn from, and comedians.
And Joan brought up such a great point, because I was thinking I'm the one that did those movies didn't really help me. And I want to say, yes, they did. They helped me cry more.
Which is good.
Which is a good thing. Joan is right. So because you have to kind of move through the trauma, you know, after World War II, maybe even World War I, there apparently so many of our soldiers that came back with that thing called shell shock that no one identified for a long time. So many of them used alcohol and substances, and then, you know, the women and children were suffering. And then I don't know when we came up with this Department for Children and families. I guess it's the child, right? We're also about the child. But anyway, so what needs, yes, it needs to be done, that you should vent, you should get validated. And if you cannot find it within your own support system, always seek out a professional. But here's something I think a lot of people don't know. It is encouraged to stay with the therapist even when they piss you off. And I say, absolutely explore that, bring that up if you can. But if when you bring it up, the therapist isn't willing to discuss it, then gosh, please go elsewhere. Because I'm so happy. I mean, I swapped therapists the way I swapped hairdressers. I just found it to be fun. And I had a client, and she's
different insights,
pop in and out. And Jane, I'm back with you. I heard that she would share all these insights that she got from all these different therapies, and she'd come back to me. She wanted to hear what I would think.
But I would say, if you don't feel that you're moving forward, you know, there was a time when, you know, I didn't really have anybody in my life that was willing to be in a room with me anymore. So if there's
not even the therapist.
Yeah. So, I mean, if you don't feel like you're getting any better, then I would say, yeah, maybe change. Because I meant to say, this girl was so nice. She was going to become a doctor. She wrote me a letter, but I don't think you should have to do this either. She wrote a letter saying that she didn't like the positive versus negative, and that she needed much more of a longer term venting style. And I thought that was so lovely of her.
She picked the wrong twin.
But it was so lovely. Yeah, she did. Back then we weren't in the practice together. We were in big separate areas, and yeah. And I appreciated the letter, but in no way should a psychiatrist or therapist have an ego. That old building, what we learned was, if all of a sudden, if you believe that you're the only person that can help that patient, you need supervision. We have to pull you away, because every single human being, including, and I don't mean to say including in an excluding way, but cleaning staff. There were times in psychiatry that you didn't have the tools to bring somebody back down so they didn't hurt themselves or somebody else. And it was the cleaning staff, because it showed that patient was so comfortable with the person that cleaned their room. They must have had conversations. So this is where I want to say, allow that. Often inpatient, when you're working in psychiatry, that's inappropriate. Watch Good Will Hunting, because we used to hug our patients in the 80s. And
then in the 90s,
they said, don't even touch a patient.
Yeah. So you know what Joan is describing, that old building? I was actually only a student nurse there, which is
running out of town. We're going on and on.
So
sorry.
I was only a student nurse there. But what Joan is describing is, there's definitely time to tell the patient, no, we're not going to talk about me. Let's go back to what this experience is like for you. But if there is a time to share, that is not all about the therapist, and it might be helpful, that actually is not a no-no. That's okay. But what Joan and I found was, even with, just watch Good Will Hunting, it's true. What Joan is describing is more of a community. And what we're trying to do in these psychiatric facilities and different, like halfway houses, we need more of it in an orphanage, apparently, is we're trying to recreate a community that we don't have. And unfortunately nowadays, at least in parts of the United States, is there isn't even a community where you're living. And we just wonder, tilt our heads and wonder, I wonder what caused this, we wonder, we wonder. And everybody now needs a therapist. Well, not everybody needs a therapist. That was supposed to be for the people who had too many things at once in their lives. And now everyone needs one, because there's a lack of community. It's like there is no shortage of nurses. There is a shortage of experienced nurses willing to work in the conditions that these hospitals, who want to penny pinch every little penny. You know, I left nursing at what nurses now start at as a salary. As an experienced nurse with about 40 years, I left with what they start with now. I mean, but now they've given the money, but they haven't given the ability for nurses to speak to one another, to sit down and have a thought about a care plan, which is necessary, and to collaborate with other disciplines to get the patient better. Instead, the nurse has to, and every other discipline has their noses in a computer now. It's just not even, it's silly. It's a lack of community, a lack of community thinking that, in my opinion, has brought everybody's mentally ill now, and it's disastrous.
Because if you are validated, and I recall my parents didn't validate in one area, but my neighbors across the way recognized something, and they said something to me, and I thought, wow, thank you for that, in my head. So if you can validate another human being, we can actually avoid a lot of the reactions to trauma. I mean, people who scream, go from 0 to 60, no, we can't help it. As that book, The Body Keeps the Score, mentions, you're now hot wired. You go from A to Z in 2 seconds. Somebody else who appears to be well adjusted and wonderful can go through the entire alphabet. You look like the fool. So yes, go get help. But as we know, I wished I had gotten more validation as a kid. We brush it off. We keep saying, oh, that was nothing. Bill Burr, not Burr, Maher, he keeps saying bullying, it's a rite of passage, pick up your bootstraps. Well, we left some human beings strapless or bootless, and you're telling them to pick stuff up. Pick what up? Quicksand. We grew up in quicksand was the scary thing. It was like, oh my God, am I going to fall into quicksand? It's never mentioned anymore.
Everybody had a plan.
Like
everybody,
you guys aren't fearful of quicksand.
Everybody tested the rope with their teeth to see if they could get themselves out.
Yeah.
We all tested that branch. It always broke, of course. Not like
wet your fingers. Not everyone did that. Go for the electricity. Don't do that. Don't do that.
Lots of thoughts there to unpack there, but I guess my main takeaways on that one is like, well, I mean, we got to also like look at, personal accountability and also the structural elements. If the structural elements like our system, doesn't offer, the kind of care or is not, taking it seriously on what kind of epidemic we have, like for healthcare, mental health, or whatever it is, then it's going to be on us to, find the right therapist. If it's not working, gotta try something different and try a different approach. Maybe to try the comedy approach, or maybe something else that's completely different. But you gotta find your way, and just status quo ain't gonna work it. So I wanted to kind of ask you, I guess next there, you also talked about like the comedians, like, because going back to like what we can do to, help ourselves, find that humor, find the comedian that resonates with you. To leave things off on a funny note, just wondering, what are the comedians that the both of you, find funny these days? And maybe a couple of recommendations. I'm all ears.
Well, I love Bill Burr, and I love Nate Bargatze and Anthony Jeselnik. I'm sure there's, who I really like? Jimmy O'Lang. He's the one who talks about being, the reason he's now a comedian is he was bullied in school. And like every person who has, like myself, who has been bullied, he said, and it opened up my ear there. I went, bing, he said it, and we become comedians. And I thought, oh my God, maybe that's how I started. Sometimes people would say, are you born with it? No, I think I was ridiculed and bullied enough that that's what I love about that kid. Anyway, those are 4. Girls, not so much. The only female, Wanda Sykes. She's fucking funny. Go ahead, Jane. Sorry, I took them all.
Joan took almost all of them. I'm glad you remembered Wanda Sykes, but there's Nikki Glazer, and there's another girl. Gosh, don't hate me. I love her. Eliza. She used to wear her hair blonde up in a ponytail like this, but Eliza is her first name.
Maybe it's just one word.
And I don't know. My father was the funniest.
He was the funniest guy
He
ever.
could tell a story and command a room like he should be on the red carpet.
And he had 6 sisters and 2 brothers, and the children that are, our age and a little older that still are alive, and our father is no longer with us. Every time we see them, they talk about how they were in awe of our father, who would come over and they would be sitting like this, listening to his stories and just laughing, because they said they didn't have that in their home.
That's
and it's
right.
Really, we were so lucky. And I think that's what you said, personal accountability. I think you're more able to have accountability in a disarming home. I read an article about LGBTQ and how they're killing themselves because they're coming from homes that are not affirming of their lifestyle. And what I want to say, I've never been a parent. Oh my God, be careful what you say if you've never had a child.
You've been a child though, Joan.
But I have been, that's right, I've been a child. And if your parents don't agree with you or your lifestyle, I get it. It's like they're saying, I disapprove with you, go fucking kill yourself. And I know that's not what they're saying, but the person in my room across from me, that was what they thought their family was saying. So what I also want to say is validate, even if you think it's the smallest little trauma ever.
So, the accountability part, it's so hard to, I don't know why. It'd be nice that if we lived in a culture where people took accountability much more quickly. Wouldn't that be nice? But when I think about myself and my roadblocks to healing, well, as a twin, you can't help but compare yourself because all of society and everybody in your life compares you. But most humans start comparing themselves to others. And I'm wondering why in kindergarten, maybe they do that now. It's very, very detrimental to compare yourself to another human, because when you suffer from, you can't help it, when you don't have a mommy or a daddy, you're going to feel badly about yourself. And you are looking for somebody to love you. Mommy, if I do that, now, mommy, are you going to look at me? How about if I do this, this, and this? Oh, can you look at me now, ma? Or dad, can you, you're just looking. And so there's this human nature that we are always looking for that. And if you can't look at how I got out of because I was headed to be the person crying for 20 years in therapy about why my deceased mother could not give me eye contact. And the best part was I was ungrateful. See, the depression take on, and I don't mean I took it on purpose, but the depression perspective, you aren't grateful for anything. So I have this wonderful father, this wonderful mother. I'm not grateful. And
that's your roadblock.
And to take accountability in my head, my black and white thinking back then was to say that I was wrong and they were right.
Yeah.
It wasn't to say your mind is tricking you, Jane, because of your hurt feelings. I mean, AA has this thing that hurt people hurt people. Well, how the heck long are we going to live in a society where everybody's hurt emotionally?
Yes.
And then, physically, look at what happens 100% of the time, 100% of the time, when a police officer kills a person of color. That's not whatever this color in my face is. I'm really not. It's very blotchy. There is an uprising. There's this looting and crime. It's this phenomenon called horizontal violence. And it only happens 100% of the time you squash a group of people. So when we live in a sexist world, you're squashing men. Well, what do they say about nursing back in the day?
Women. You're squashing women, not men.
Oh, I'm sorry. Thank you. So in a sexist world, when the men were squashing, well, maybe we need to be in a world where women start squashing men. Oh, I think we are. We're leaning towards that now. Men don't know how to date. Men don't know what to say. And we were invited on a podcast where men aren't having sex.
40%. They said they're not having any sex, which I guess the population, the globe is overcrowded. Be celibate for a while and enjoy it. See, this is what I want to say. Come from a different perspective. Don't come from the victim of the school shooting. Come from the shooter's perspective. Change perspective.
Change try to solve the issue.
Don't come from, the cop, getting this terrible person who's sick in prison. Ask the prisoner how they got to this point. Well, of course they won't say it right away, but come from a different perspective. You don't, what's the insanity quote? Keep doing it. Keep doing it the same way and expecting a different result. And it's crazy. It's crazy because, my son read this book or saw, I always get this wrong, but in 100 or 500 years, when we look back on something in our culture, and we will call it probably barbaric. They asked some scholar, Joan. Yeah, and I think it was Joe Rogan asking a scholar, and he said, I don't think it's going to be 100 years. I think it could take 500, and it'll be the prison system is what he called it. Because like we said, if you're not already sociopathic, the prison system
will allow you to become that.
The guy, this person, I've even had the person who got involved in a gang rape because of peer pressure in college. And then the poor guy admitted it to me. And then I never saw him again. And what I want to say is I wished I had been able to say, thank you for trusting me enough for letting that out. But it was interesting that I was sexually assaulted. And what I want to say is it was so interesting to me because I liked this man a lot. And what I want to say is Jane, one of her favorite books was Good People Do Bad Things. Yes, they do. We shouldn't, that cancel culture. Somebody may have made a mistake. Tell them it was a mistake. Let them mull that around, but don't hang them or give them the gas chamber for the mistake. No wonder young people are afraid to make mistakes.
And nobody wants to get a job. Everybody wants to be their own boss because, so for example, in nursing, for the entirety of nursing, if you made a mistake, there's something called an incident report would be written up. It would always go in your file, but it was private, and you, when you're time for a raise, and
That was their way of not giving you the raise.
they maybe what, but it was the time to talk about, you know, how could you do better and this and that, what could be different. It was always with someone older and wiser than you, your supervisor or whatever. Now you make a mistake in the world of medicine.
Yeah, it's terrible.
People are being forced to surrender their licenses.
Yeah, and big, huge fines, like a psychiatrist we used to know,
Thousands of dollars
for a mistake, and no one died. No one died. But you know, in our other sister's a hairstylist, hairdresser. They make mistakes all the time, and we tip them. Isn't that interesting? So we actually tip the hairstylist for not giving us. I actually brought a picture, but it doesn't look anything like this. But it was a picture. But, you know, I said to my sister, Lori, how come you can get it all wrong and I tip people? But in medicine, we get it wrong and we get ostracized. Except in that old building that I was talking about in the 80s when we were good caregivers.
Yes.
I was written up 5 times as a brand new nurse. Some were bad write-ups. People were in restraints, 4-pointed in a restraint, broke out of the restraint and was smoking in the seclusion room, which we never monitored properly back then. So there were big write-ups. Another person got hurt because she beat somebody up because I let her out of restraints because she said she was constipated. She was in restraints for 3 months, constipated. Anyway, I got written up 5 times. I got a raise. I couldn't believe that was the best job, the best teaching job.
And tell them why. Joan said, I did so many things wrong. You're giving me a raise?
I said to the director of nursing, how could you do this? I did everything wrong. She said, you never made the same mistake twice. That's called learning, Joan. It's like, oh my God. So today, people don't have that. That's horrible. And my subsequent jobs, they weren't very nice. But that, oh my God, that was a beautiful job.
Discipline is supposed to be teaching. And we kind of live in a society that, if you think about it, the prison system is not that far off from some of the systems out there, including a family system. I had countless, I have lost count on, and this could be a generational thing because our parents never did this, and we did slam doors and we, you know, threw things and we yelled, and we are Italian.
Oh, but other
and so there were countless people that took the bedroom door off the hinges
of their kid,
of the adolescent who was acting out, who's just saying, something's wrong, please. I don't know how to express myself, but something is wrong. Now they have no privacy in a time where they need the most privacy. So it has to be safe privacy, but now they have no privacy. So it's just the system, it will change because life does get cyclical, I've noticed, and we are old enough. And I just hope it changes soon before we lose more good nurses and doctors and medical assistants and whatever, the countless people that are losing their life income over mistakes.
Yeah.
Can I just share the one that devastated me the most? It was a male staff member, and I want to call him a certified nurse's aide, but he might have been some other type of staff member. And apparently he said something rude to a visitor. He had to take a class. There, of course, was a fine. And then I think he lost his license over it, but don't quote me. But I mean, there's things that, why would you have to do that? Why can't take the class, but discuss it with a mentor in the facility that you're working at, please.
Can you imagine another job where you make a mistake and you can't continue your work? You know, a carpenter, I mean, he has to be able to, he or she has to be, anybody, a hairstylist, they get to make mistakes all the time. I can't get over that. And we tip them a lot, but I think in Europe, they don't tip it, but sometimes it's in the cost of the whatever.
But the point is you know, when you have these weird systems, when you have a rise in mental illness, I mean, I'm going to go right into medicine, and you have a rise in amputations with diabetes. What are we missing?
Well, yeah,
we're missing something. So either our food supply isn't correct, or I don't know what's missing there, but something is wrong. And I have a feeling everybody wants to be on a keto diet, which is only supposed to be short term. it can turn into a medical emergency if you do it forever. And on the psych part, why don't we delve into what is going on? Why is it a revolving door now? The inpatient, no one's getting better and everyone needs a therapist.
I guess the question is, like, what is the way forward? I mean, you're talking about cancel culture and, you know, the diet, different things there. Like, to me, it sounds like everybody, you know, we have to kind of look at our lane. What can we do? You know, again, the personal accountability. What can we do, you know, given, you know, our sphere of influence? And we got to ask more questions and be proactive with ourselves. And you did mention earlier that, yeah, we need an outlet to yell or whatever to get stuff off our chest. But at the same time, we have to move that forward and get to a point where we can accept people that make mistakes. We can't vilify, you know, everyone for every single mistake, because everyone's made mistakes. And I think
absolutely. And
yeah.
How do you learn if you don't make it?
Yeah. How do you learn?
I have one statement for people to mull over, because I am very passionate about discipline as teaching. And people, here it is. I was from my family therapist in school. People lie to protect themselves. And you could go from there. We don't want lying. Well, why did I need to feel that I had to lie? What are the consequences here? People lie to protect themselves.
One way to move forward. I was atheist and I noticed that I was not getting better. And it made me sick that people said, you know, you really ought to have a belief system. And when AA said it was okay to have like the universe or the actual earth itself, then I feel like then I started to get better. I was ignorant as an atheist that there was something called forgiveness work. I didn't think that had anything to do with me. That had to do with whoever you believed in and whatever. And in my own practice, I noticed the people who couldn't move forward were the ones that couldn't forgive. And that's a hard one. So like our book actually says how we let that shit go. And I don't know what else it says, the second part, but it was really hard. And my one thing would be is you stop saying I'm a realist, because to get better, you actually have to break a habit. How do you break a habit if you're not going to lie to yourself?
Or if you're too strict in your belief system.
Yep. So to get better initially, instead of saying I'm ugly, I don't know what guys say, I have a small penis, whatever, start lying to yourself. Because the movie that helped me was when the Asian human being said that in his language, he didn't have past, present, and future. He only had present. And I had to really look into that. So the future, we always say, oh, I wish this would happen. Stay with the present and literally speak your words like Native Americans spoke. When they wanted rain, they didn't say, oh, gee, I hope it rains. I hope it rains. They huddled together and imagined and said, it is raining. Thank you. It is raining. So by staying present, that's for your own personal space. You don't want to be at work saying, it's raining because you want your garden watered, and people will be like, what is your problem? It's not, the sun is shining. So do all of this in the privacy of your own home, because you'll be called names. But if you don't start with the present and say, I am, or I have, you don't get the stuff in the future. The Irish talk about that. It's always if it would be done. And it always kept happiness in the future. Stay here in the present and help somebody, for God's sakes. That's the number one way to do it.
When you're as selfish as I was, yes, and I'm going to say that word selfish with the depression, everything was more, I could not imagine helping others, because I was one of the, what about me? But who's going to help me? But what about me? And let me go talk about this for 3 more years and what was done to me. And because what I was unwilling to do was I was unwilling to look at things differently. I was unwilling to change. I was unfortunately as universally unique as a lot of my really working clients that suffered from addiction. They were they worked real hard in it. And I found myself thinking, well, oh no, that's me now.
I would stop a client if they said the word, because I'm going to go back to that old building. And when we charted, we were taught that you never make a judgment. You don't know if that person is unwilling. They might be unable. at that time to do it. So back in that building where we had no judgment, and we had people who murdered their parent or set the house on fire, where people died, or there were people who were molested,
Had an arsenal in their closet.
by every person under the sun, with key parties and all kinds of this. The one girl, and she's still on my mind to this day, the only orgasm she ever had was when her father raped her, because he raped her many times. And there was one time when she ended up having an orgasm. And when I went to school with all those cops, the cop mentioned where he was from, and immediately I thought of the girl, because I was traumatized in my 20s as a new nurse. I didn't even know fathers did that. I was ignorant. And I looked at him and I said her name, and he said, she's gone. She threw herself in her wheelchair off of the bridge, because I had left and she was still alive. Anyway, it's just depressing. So let's move more towards a loving, validating community. And the reason, I know people say, oh, but everybody will want a trophy and everybody will have to have this. Not with humor. With humor, you get to disarm people. They get to laugh at their own faults and move forward. We won't be hating each other. We won't. Okay. Thank you.
Well, those are some great words to leave us off with. So I thought before we close here, I always ask my guests a two-parter question. So here goes. What are you most grateful for? And what are you both most looking forward to in the future?
I could start.
Let me.
Let her.
Joan is so much funnier.
Mine's not going to be funny.
No, well, I'm almost never. I am most grateful for not terminating a pregnancy in 1990. And that's my son, Adam. And what happened was I was so afraid of pregnancy. Growing up, I thought pregnancy meant death. Our mother almost died having us. And so anyway, I'm so grateful that I had the opportunity to watch a little human grow. And then I did a lot of reading in the doctor's offices. I didn't really read a lot, but I tried to read about each stage. And so the gratefulness is, I often joke that my son is the reason I'm alive today. And it's, kind of in a corny way, but he is. That's
what's the two-parter though? What you're most grateful for, and what's the other
what
one?
I'm looking most forward to.
Oh, I see. Yeah.
I know what I'm looking most forward to is the fact that I am, however old, 60 something years old. And I said to someone yesterday, but I don't have any pain. And she said, oh my God, you know how many people are your age that are like you that don't have pain? I guess a lot of people have physical pain. I have none right now. And where I'm headed is to live my life like I'm 40, I think.
Well, I am most grateful for having a twin sister, because when I went through a cancer scare and had been learning that if you suffered from cancer, you most likely have been through a lot of things that made you feel hurt and resentful. And I was. And the only way my processing disorder felt I could deal with this cancer scare was to ask my family if I could tell them everything that hurt me. And this way here, I could get through this. And I really had that in my head. Like, I know I could beat this cancer if I could just tell you what hurt me. And my parents looked at me like they were dogs. Like, I don't get it. And that was hilarious to me. My older sister, who had turned me on to Louise Hay, said, Joan, you know that all that work is within you. And talk about, I didn't know how. I was not a therapist at the time. I was a nurse. I could take care of other people. I didn't know how to take care of myself. So Jane, when I asked her, she sat speechless and allowed me to say from birth to, I think I was 25 or 35, what bothered me and what hurt me. And she sat quiet. So that helped me get through that. And what I am looking most forward to is, because I'm an identical twin and God says to use all of your assets. My twin is an asset, that I have one who's a mirror twin. So what I'm looking most forward to is we have worked on a documentary about twins. And also we have been consulted by a film company about twins being estranged. And I just feel that we could help the world heal because we shared amniotic fluid. We came out of the uterus not saying, can I have this? It was, what can we have? No one called me by my name until I was much older. It felt odd. I was twin Twinny, or you guys. And I feel badly for people today that say, yes, get my name right or my pronoun right. But instead, think about your assets. I'm not angry about being called twin or twinny. That was my same DNA, different fingerprints. But yes, it's wonderful being a twin. I can't comment on being single because I was never a single person. But thank you so much. It's been wonderful.
Yeah, thank you both. So if more people want to find out all the stuff you're doing, where can they find you?
Oh, just in every aspect of social media, we are Therapy Twins. We are on TikTok, but don't know how to get back on it.
We don't know.
But other than that, all the other ones, and my phone number's there. You have to text. I don't answer the telephone. Email is there. info@Therapy Twins. Our website is therapytwins.com. Real easy, and that's how they can get in touch.
So that's a wrap for episode 22. If you like this podcast, please give it a thumbs up or hit the subscribe button below. If you didn't like this podcast, give it a thumbs down, but please do tell us why with a comment below. If you have any other feedback, comments, or suggestions, you know what to do. Thanks for joining us, and namaste, everyone.